My stepmother stole my football dream. The lawyer she bribed was my husband's brother. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "That scholarship was never yours to begin with." And the worst part? The lawyer sitting across from her, the one who had just signed away everything I had worked for, was the same man whose brother I had married 3 months before. If you have never felt the ground open beneath your feet while everyone around you is smiling, then you cannot imagine what that moment felt like for me. Stay with me because this story goes deeper than betrayal. It goes all the way down to the roots of a family that had been rotting long before I arrived. My name is Nkiruka. I was born in a small compound in Nnewi, the first daughter of Chibueze Okonkwo, a secondary school football coach who poured everything he had into the sport. My father was not a rich man. He wore the same pair of shoes to every match, but he coached with a fire that made even professional clubs come and watch his boys. What most people did not know was that he coached girls too, privately, in the evenings, on a patch of dirt behind our compound. And the only girl he coached was me. From the time I was 8 years old, I was out there with him. By the time I was 12, I could control the ball better than most of the boys in his squad. My father never hid his pride. He would tell anyone who cared to listen that Nkiruka would play football professionally one day, that she would go to Europe, that she would make the family name something. My mother died when I was 9, a brief illness that moved too fast for us to fight it. After that, it was just my father and me, and the football, and the dreams we built together inside that small compound. Then came Obiageli. She arrived in our lives when I was 13, a widow from Onitsha with 2 children of her own, a son named Ikenna and a daughter named Adaura. My father married her quietly, without much ceremony, and just like that, our compound was full of strangers. I genuinely tried to welcome them. I cooked with her, I helped Adaura with her homework. I even let Ikenna use my father's old football because he said he wanted to train. He did not train. He kicked it once, got bored, and left it in the gutter. But Obiageli was not a woman who could be welcomed. She was a woman who arrived to take. She was also a woman who was very good at appearing not to be that. She spoke sweetly to my father's friends. She attended church with more enthusiasm than anyone in the compound. She called my father my husband with a warmth that made other women in the neighborhood say she was a blessing. But in the private architecture of our daily life, there was a different woman entirely. One who kept accounts, one who remembered every slight, real or imagined, and settled them in ways that were invisible unless you were the one being settled against. At first, the signs were small. She would move my training kit to make room for Ikenna's things. She would serve food, and somehow my portion was always the smallest. She would speak to my father in low voices late at night, and whenever I walked in, the conversation would stop. Once, I came back from evening training to find my father's old coaching notes, the ones he used to teach me technique, in a bag by the gate, set out with other things she was sending to the church store. She said she was cleaning. She smiled when she said it. I took the notes back upstairs without a word. But that night, I understood something important about Obiageli. She did not hate me loudly. She hated me quietly, methodically, one small erasure at a time. I noticed. Children always notice. But my father was happy in the way a grieving man gets happy when he thinks he has found something to fill the hole. So I stayed quiet. But then, things changed. When I was 15, a national football development program launched by a federation called the Eagles Rising Initiative began scouting secondary school girls across the Southeast. They were looking for talented young female footballers to put through an elite training program, and at the end of it, 3 girls would receive full scholarships to attend a prestigious sports academy in Abuja with a pipeline directly to international competitions. My father heard about it and immediately registered me. Subscribe to Echoes of African's Truth channel if you are not already, because the story I am about to tell you is the kind that makes you question everyone around you. The trials were held in Oka. I remember the day clearly. I wore a yellow jersey, number 7. There were over 200 girls from across Anambra State. I played the best football of my young life. I scored twice, assisted 3 times, and my coach, my father, stood by the sideline with tears streaming from his face. He did not wipe them, he just let them fall. 3 weeks later, the letter came. Nkiruka Chibueze Okonkwo, selected. Full scholarship, reporting date January 15th. I screamed. My father screamed. We danced in that compound until the neighbors came out to ask what was happening. Even some of them joined. That night, my father made his famous pepper soup and said, "Your mother is watching and she is proud." What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that Obiageli had read that letter before I did. She had intercepted it from the postal box that morning. She had read every word, and then she put it back, sealed it as best she could, and placed it on the table like nothing had happened. But while we were dancing, while my father was crying, she was already on the phone. Calling someone. Quietly, from the back room, she made a call that would take 3 years to unravel. His name was Chukwuemeka Eze, a lawyer based in Enugu, known in certain circles for helping people navigate what he called complicated documentation. In plain language, the man fixed things, legal things, for people who had money and needed paperwork to say something it was not supposed to say. Obiageli had used him before. Back in Onitsha, before she came to our compound, there were rumors about her late husband's will, about properties that should have gone to his family, but somehow ended up in her name. Nobody could prove anything. Chukwuemeka had made sure of that. What Obiageli told him that night, I only found out years later. She told him she needed the scholarship transferred. She wanted it issued under her daughter's name, Adaora. She said my father would not fight it because he did not know the full process. She said the federation was new and their internal systems were disorganized. She said if they received a notarized document claiming that the original selected candidate had withdrawn voluntarily and nominated a replacement, it would go through. Chukwuebuka told her the risk. She told him the price she was willing to pay. He accepted. January 15th came. I was packed. I was ready. I was at the motor park with my father when a federation official called. He was confused, apologetic. He said there had been documentation error. He said that the record showed I had withdrawn from the scholarship in writing and that my replacement, Anadara Obiageli, had already reported and been processed. My father could not speak for a full minute. I did not cry. I went very still. The kind of still that happens when your body refuses to believe what your ears are hearing. My father, who never raised his voice, raised it that day. He demanded explanations. The official was genuinely confused because to him, the paperwork was in order, notarized, signed, clean. When we got home, Obiageli was sitting in the parlor with her legs crossed watching television. She looked at us with the expression of a woman hearing bad news for the first time. She said, "Eh? What happened? They didn't accept her?" And something about the way she said it, just slightly too smooth, just slightly too rehearsed, made my skin go cold. But my father could not see it. He was too distraught to see anything. Adaora spent the next 2 years in Abuja at that academy. She was not even a footballer. She was interested in fashion and spent most of her time taking pictures. She left the program after 18 months. The scholarship, my scholarship, was essentially wasted. But by then, the damage was done. My window had closed. The Eagles Rising initiative had moved on. The Scouts had moved on. And I was stuck in Newi, watching the dream my father had built for me disappear. My father became a quieter man after that. He coached his boys, he came home, he ate, he slept. Something in him had broken, but he was too proud to show it. He never confronted Obiageli directly. I think, somewhere deep down, he was afraid of what he might find if he dug too hard. I threw myself into education. If football was gone, I would build something else. I studied business administration at a polytechnic in Enugu, and it was there, at 21 years old, that I met Obiora Eze. Obiora was warm and funny and direct in the way that made you trust him quickly. He worked in sports management, which felt like the universe's twisted sense of humor. The man who would love me was in the world I had lost. We dated for 2 years. He met my father, who liked him immediately. We married in a small ceremony at my father's compound. And it was at my own wedding reception that I first met Obiora's family properly. His mother, his aunties, his cousins, and his older brother, Chukwuebuka Eze. He shook my hand. He smiled. He said, "Welcome to the family, my sister." And something happened in my chest, a strange electric pull of recognition that I could not explain. I had never met this man, so why did his face make something in me go cold? I told myself it was wedding day nerves. Pause here for a second, because what I'm about to tell you next is the part that made me realize the world can fold in on itself in ways that seem impossible. If you have been watching this channel, you know that our stories do not follow straight lines. Subscribe if you haven't, because this one is about to turn completely on its head. 3 months into our marriage, Obiora and I visited his family in Enugu for a holiday. It was at dinner one evening when Chukwuebuka was talking about his old cases with the kind of loose pride that lawyers get when they've had 2 glasses of palm wine that he mentioned a name. He did not mean anything by it, he was just talking. He said, years ago, a woman came to me from Newi, a very sharp woman. She wanted a scholarship document redirected. I told her the risk, she paid well. I stopped eating. He laughed and said, "These things happen, women protecting their children." Obiora said something about the ethics of it, half joking, and Chukwuebuka said, the girl's name was Nkiruka something, Okonkwo, her father was a coach. My fork dropped from my hand. Everyone at the table looked at me. Obiora asked if I was okay. I looked at Chukwuebuka, my husband's brother, a man who had held my hand at my wedding and called me my sister, and the entire architecture of my past rearranged itself in a single second. He did not recognize me. Why would he? He had never met me. He had only dealt with paperwork and a woman named Obiageli. But I recognized the story. I recognized every detail of it, because it was my story. I said nothing that night. I excused myself, said I was not feeling well, and sat in the guest room for 3 hours trying to understand what I was living inside. The next morning, I called my father. I told him what I had heard. There was a long silence on the line. Then my father, who had spent 6 years carrying a quiet grief he could never name, began to cry. Not the proud tears he cried at my trials, the other kind, the kind that comes from finally having the thing you feared confirmed. He said, "I always knew, Nkiruka. I always knew." What followed was not a revenge story in the way films make revenge look like. It was messier than that. It was slower and more painful. I went back to Enugu the next week and I sat down with Chukwuebuka privately. I told him who I was. I watched his face move through denial, then calculation, then something that looked for just a moment like shame. He said I could not prove it. I told him I did not need to prove it to the public. I needed to prove it to the Eagles Rising initiatives whose records still existed, and to the Federation's internal ethics board which had been established 2 years after the program launched, specifically because of irregularities like the one he had created. I told him I had done my research. I told him that the statute of limitations on fraudulent documentation of scholarship transfers under federal education guidelines was 8 years and it had only been 6. He sat very still. I told him that what I wanted was simple. I did not want him in prison, though he deserved it. I did not want money, though we had lost plenty. What I wanted was a full written disclosure to the Federation of what had happened, a formal apology lodged with the ethics board,
There was a very
and the
long
truth put on
silence.
record so that it could never
I watched
be erased.
Chukwuebuka look at his
He asked
hands.
why I would not want more.
He was a man
I
who
told
had
him,
built his life
because
on
justice is not
navigating
the
grey
same thing as
areas,
punishment.
telling himself
And I
that
am not
the
my
law was
stepmother.
a tool and tools did not have morality. But the thing about sitting across from the person whose life your tool destroyed is that the grey area disappears. There is only a woman who was 13 years old and full of fire and a piece of paper that you signed, and the distance between who she was supposed to become and who the world forced her to be instead. He did not apologize that day, but he did not refuse either. He signed the disclosure 5 weeks later. My father came to Enugu the day it was filed. He sat across from Chukwuebuka in a conference room and said nothing for a very long time. Then he said, "My daughter lost her dream because of you. I hope you understand what that means." And he stood up and walked out. But here is the part of this story that people do not expect. When the disclosure was filed and the Federation's ethics board opened their review, they discovered that the Eagles Rising initiative had, in subsequent years, established a mature talent reinstatement track, a pathway specifically designed for athletes who could demonstrate that they had been unjustly removed from development pipelines through administrative or legal misconduct. It was not widely publicized. It was buried in the Federation's updated charter from 4 years ago, but it existed. My case was exactly the kind of case it was designed for. The board reviewed my file, my original trial scores, witness accounts from the officials who had been present at the Auka trials, and Chukwuebuka's disclosure. They deliberated for 6 weeks. Then they issued a finding. Nkiruka Chibueze Okonkwo had been fraudulently removed from the Eagles Rising Scholarship Program. The transfer to Adaora Obiageli had been executed through forged withdrawal documentation. The scholarship had been misallocated. They could not give me back the years. Nobody could give me back the years. But they offered me something I had never considered possible: a position on the initiative's mentorship and development coaching board, working with the next generation of female footballers in the Southeast. A paid, formal role in the sport I had loved since I was 8 years old. Not as a player, that ship had sailed, but as a builder, as a keeper of the dream for other girls who looked the way I had looked, standing behind my father's compound on a dirt patch. I accepted it the same day. Now, here is the question nobody ever asks in these stories. What happened to Obiageli? She had grown old in my father's compound. After Adaora left the program and came back with nothing, Obiageli's standing in the family had quietly shifted. Ikenna had moved to Lagos and was not doing well. Adaora had married and was living in Port Harcourt. The compound that Obiageli had maneuvered to control had become simply the place where she lived with an aging man she had married and a silence between them that neither of them knew how to fill. When my father eventually learned the full truth, not just my suspicion, but the documented, confirmed, officially filed truth, he did not throw her out. He was too old and too tired for dramatic gestures. What he did was simpler and in some ways more devastating. He stopped performing the happiness that had been holding the household together. He looked at her one evening and said, "You took something from my daughter that you cannot give back. I will not leave you, but I will not forget." And that was all he said. In Igbo tradition, there is a saying, "Onye wete oji wete ndo." He who brings kola brings life, but it can be turned. She who takes from life takes from the kola. Obiageli had taken, and the compound knew it, the walls knew it, and every morning she woke up in that house was a morning she lived with the weight of what she had done. As for Obiora, my husband, the man who did not know what his brother had done, that was a different kind of pain to navigate. He found out the way spouses find out things in a marriage, not all at once, but piece by piece, each piece harder than the last. The first piece was the night I came back from the guest room and told him calmly what I had heard at dinner. He went very quiet. Then he asked me to repeat it. Then he sat on the edge of the bed for 40 minutes without speaking. When he finally spoke, he said, "Nkiruka, I need you to believe me." I told him I did, and I meant it. Obiora was not his brother. The face that smiles at wrongdoing and the face that is simply connected to it by blood are two different faces, and I had learned in all my years of watching Obiageli the difference between them. But knowing he was innocent did not make the next few months easy. There were evenings when he would look at me and I could see him turning it over. The probability that somewhere in a version of this life, I never needed to marry a man whose family had taken something from me. There were evenings when I could see him calculating whether our entire love story was something the universe had built on crooked foundations. I had to talk him out of that darkness more than once. I told him, the crooked thing happened before us. What we built is ours. He heard me. Slowly, he came back to himself. He grieved it in his own way. He apologized for his brother with a sincerity that I had to receive carefully because Obiora had done nothing wrong and yet the guilt sat on him like it was his. We had long conversations in the dark, the kind of conversations that either break a marriage or build something in it that could not have existed before. We built. He became, in fact, one of the most vocal voices within his own family for what Chukwuebuka needed to do. It was Obiora who drove his brother to the Federation office the day the disclosure was filed. It was Obiora who sat in that waiting room and waited. Not for me, but because it was the right thing to do. That is the man I married, and I choose to believe the universe does not deliver pain without also delivering somewhere in the package something worth keeping. My father is still coaching. He is 61 now, and he still goes to that dirt patch behind the compound on evenings when the light is good. The boys from the neighborhood still come. Some girls too these days. He coaches all of them. The first time I brought a group of under-17 female footballers from the Federation's development program to watch him coach, he did not say anything dramatic. He just looked at them and then at me and said, "Good, now we continue." That was enough. I have been asked many times since this story became known in our community what I would say to young girls in situations like mine. Girls who are being quietly robbed by the people in their own homes. Girls whose step-parents are moving pieces on a board they cannot fully see. Girls whose dreams are being redirected by hands that are supposed to protect them. I say this, the fraud always leaves a record. Not always a legal one, not always one you can see immediately, but somewhere the truth writes itself down, in the memory of officials at a trials ground, in the loose talk of a lawyer at a family dinner, in the way a woman's face goes too smooth at exactly the wrong moment. The truth is patient. You have to be more patient than the lie. And I say this too. Do not let the loss of one door convince you there are no other doors. I never played professionally. I will not pretend that doesn't hurt. There are evenings when I watch a match and feel something in my chest that I can only describe as grief for the version of myself that was supposed to be on that pitch. That grief is real. I do not run from it. But grief is not the end of the story unless you let it be.
I sit on the Federation board. I identify girls who had what I had. I fight for their scholarships and their futures with everything I have learnt from having my own taken. I am my father's daughter. I am a footballer who never played professionally, but who has sent 7 girls to national competitions in the last 4 years. You tell me what that is worth. They called it a folk tale when this story spread. People in the markets, people on social media, calling it something out of a story. Maybe they are right. Nigeria has always told its truths in stories. Our grandmothers knew that the most dangerous things hide in plain sight, in the faces of people who call you family, in the papers they handle on your behalf, in the love they perform while their hands are busy taking. The story of the evil stepmother is older than any of us. But the part where the daughter survives, learns the full truth, and builds something from the rubble, that part is new. That part we are still writing. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of someone, or something you lost, or a door that was closed before you could walk through it, then sit with that for a moment. The world is full of Nikirukas who never found out what happened to their scholarship, who spent their whole lives wondering why the door was closed, never knowing someone had locked it from the inside. Share this story for them. Let it reach the girl who needs to hear that the truth eventually surfaces. Subscribe to this channel, not because you need to hear something dramatic next, but because the next story might be the one that changes how you see your own life. Stay with us. The stories are worth staying for.